This morning I'm doing a seed blend cracker that I'm going to attempt to bake in the oven. I'm going to do half my recipe in a regular oven set at 325, and the other half of the mix I will put into a dehydrator like I usually do, but I wanted to test it out for people who don't have a dehydrator. So I've got a fairly large bowl here, and we're going to be dumping into the bowl 1 cup of sunflower seeds, a half a cup of chia seeds. Chia seeds go a long way and they kind of poof up, you know. 1/2 of a cup of sunflower seeds, not a whole cup. And it's 1.5 cups of sesame seeds. So these are the whole white sesame seeds. And to kind of bind it and hold it all together, since we're not using eggs or anything like that, you can either use the blanched almond flour, or you can use a nut flour blend if you happen to have that around. This is almonds and coconut, pecans and walnuts. That's a good binder for most of my seed or nut crackers, but I'm going to use the almond flour today. So you need 1/2 of a cup. Just to kind of bind it together. Now I'm going to put in, because I like that flavor, I'm going to put in a tablespoon of nutritional yeast, the Bragg's nutritional yeast, and we're going to use 1/2 of a teaspoon. I'm going to put a heaping 1/2 of a teaspoon of Himalayan pink salt. And I like the flavor of this in my seed crackers. This is optional, of course. You can put any kind of, you can just leave it as is, or you can put in something that'll give it a little more of a, sorry if that's coming out backwards, but that's organic Bragg's Sprinkle 24 herbs and spices seasoning. And I'm going to put into that about 2 tablespoons, because it's delicious to me. Kind of stir those around together. I like wearing gloves because I want to get in there and use my hands for part of this too. So you see that's all just kind of mixed up together. And when you start adding water, you want to be careful. Now I'm starting with a 1.5 cups of plain water, because those chia seeds are going to swell. And you want to stir that around. And the thing about chia seeds is you need to let that kind of sit for them to start gelling up a little bit. You want to let that sit for maybe 5 minutes. And come back and stir it again. And if you need to add a little more water, you add more water. Can't take it away. So you can see my consistency right now. It looks just like maybe thick oatmeal at this point. So if it looks like it's not spreadable, if it's not thin enough to spread it out nicely on the pan, and I'm using my largest cookie sheet pan. Well, it's actually a jelly roll pan, but you know, most people think of it as a cookie sheet. It's got about a 1/2 inch lip on it here, but any pan that you have, it can be totally flat. It can be a big round pizza pan. Now you can line it with parchment paper, or you can use these silicone mats. I have a silicone mat in here that fits just perfectly that I got at Aldi's. So I'm going to be spreading it out on that, just enough that it'll go to the edges with this offset spatula. And whatever amount will fit on here is what I'm going to test out and bake. And the rest of it I'll put in the dehydrator, because I want it to be very thin. For a cracker, you want this to be, and it's going to poof up a little bit when it bakes. Don't you love that word, poof? But try to get it down to only 1/8 of an inch if you can, and spread it out evenly. And after it's baked at 325, you can bake it at lower, but it'll take longer. So I'm going to do like a quicker bake on it. And after it's baked about 10 minutes, I'm going to take it out and score it. Not all the way through, just lightly score it into sort of like squares so it'll break or cut nicely later. And then I'm going to put it back in there. And I'm just going to bake it until I think it's crispy enough and has the right color. And I'm going to watch it carefully. I'm going to set it for like 10 minutes at a time, watching it, because I have not ever baked my crackers in an oven before. So this is a newbie for me that I'm experimenting today. For the benefit of all of you that are watching and that are unfamiliar with baking your crackers in the oven and you use a dehydrator, then we're going to test this out. Now, in a dehydrator, that's for people who want to try to preserve all of the nutritional value, and they don't want to really cook their food. That's not my purpose for my seed crackers most of the time. I just want to have crackers, you know, healthy crackers around for a good alternative to the junk you find in the stores. So now that's been setting for a couple of minutes. I'm going to stir it again. Trying to do all of this in real time. I mean, usually you'll let those chia seeds sit for longer and then stir them. Well, see, this is not going to be real spreadable, so I think it needs to be a little soupier. That was 1.5 cups. So I'm going to get a little more water. Put in a little bit at a time. That's about 1/2 cup. Stir it in. This is the boring part. I want it to be, like I said, not so soupy that it's going to run all over the place on me, but spreadable. Can't think of anything to compare it to right now because it's so chunky. Can't really compare it to pancake batter or cookie batter. Excuse that little lapse there. Wanted to mute that phone. Okay, so how's that looking as far as spreadability? Remember, those chia seeds are going to continue to swell up just a little. Get a little gelatinous there. You can make this just strictly with the chia and the sesame seeds. I've made crackers with just those two. They're delicious. If you want just a plain cracker, but if you like something a little more savory, a little more flavor and all to it, that's where you'd be putting in your spices. Whatever flavor you like, garlic, so on, rosemary. This has got all of them. Okay, I'm going to test that out. I'm going to put a big spoonful of that right in the middle here and kind of test it out as far as how it's going to spread. Yeah, I think that's going to be good. Now down in the bottom of this, it's getting a little soupy. That's okay. That'll work out just fine. Just keep stirring it together a little, and that'll go into the dehydrator for the dehydrator crackers. And yes, I can always add more of the almond flour to thicken up that soupy part in the bottom. Now I'm going to just lay this on top here and take that offset spatula and begin to spread that out. Why do I like the offset spatulas? Well, because they've got that little hump on them. You can work around the edges of a pan. You're not trying to work with a knife blade, you know, that's flat and trying to get in there. These are wonderful. You can get just about any size or a set of them on Amazon, or you can buy a couple of different sizes at Walmart. A little more in the corners here, and it'll be ready to go into the oven, which I have already preheated. Now when you get to a certain point and you feel like, well, I've got a whole tray full and I've got some left over, you can use that as a base for another type of cracker. In other words, at this point you could add pumpkin seeds to that blend. Doesn't matter how many seeds you put in there. More almond flour. You can mix the nut flour with that. Just keep pressing until you get it about that thickness, about 1/8 of an inch thick. Just like if you were pressing out pie dough. Notice I'm using the back of that to kind of keep it into a little perfect squares, but you don't have to be perfect, of course. Okay, so when you've got that the way you like it, you're going to put it into the oven. Now you'll see a lot of things will say turn your oven as low as you can possibly get it to kind of mimic a dehydrator. Most ovens, electric ovens that is, don't go any lower than 200. And then you're going to have to leave this stuff in there for hours, you know, a couple of hours, maybe 3, from what I've read. Like I said, this is new for me. That's almost 1/4 of an inch thick, I'm thinking, because of those fat sunflower seeds. My sunflower seeds were the sprouted ones, so a little bit heftier, I guess. There. Now I'm going to put that into the oven and bake it until I feel like it's ready. So this would be part 1, and then I will stop the recording and show you later part 2. I can try to do the pause on here, but if it doesn't work, then there'll be a part 2. Okay, so the seed crackers are out of the oven now, and here's what I've learned. It took 40 minutes, and I also bumped up, after 10 minutes, I bumped up the heat to 350 instead of 325 because I don't have the patience for that. Now, when you do dehydrator crackers, you just put them in there and forget about them. I don't care if it takes 10 hours. They're doing their thing, you know, and when they're ready, they're ready. And I always start my dehydrator stuff in the mornings, and if it goes all day long, depending on what I'm doing, how moist it is, if it's fruit or whatever. But crackers typically only take about 4 to 6 hours. And let me pause that just a minute. Sorry, I'm going to learn one of these days to mute the phone, ringing. So what I've learned is that for approximately what I had with the recipe was 2 cups of seeds altogether to a half a cup of the almond flour. One of my other recipes called for 1.5 cups of the nut flour and to about 2 to 2.5 cups of seeds, and they came out just perfect. So I needed more almond flour because it'll bind it together. Now, 40 minutes is what it ended up taking. I really, like I said, I don't have the patience for that because I was testing this out. Excuse me. I had to keep watching it, you know, patting it to see if it was ready and watching so these nuts, or seeds rather, didn't burn. So if I knew that it was going to take 40 minutes like I do now, what I would have done is just go ahead and thicken this up with more almond flour, the rest of it, like I did, and went ahead and put in another sheet of the cracker mix and did 2 of them at the same time and just set the timer and be done with it. But because I wasn't sure, you know, and it was experimenting, now I have to bake these. So I can either do those in the oven now after I take these up, or I can put them in the dehydrator. I'll make that decision later, but I wanted to show you on these now that I've been letting them cool just a little, of course. So see if I can show a close-up of that. So that's a little piece I broke off, and they're very fragile. So the seeds are going to kind of fall apart like that, you see. But basically, you don't even need a knife. You just go in there and just kind of break them apart like this. Now the next one's with more almond flour in it, or if it had been the nut blend flour, they hold up better. You see the bottom is nice and golden too. Pretty color. Some people will take a batch of crackers and they'll flip them. Put parchment paper on top and then put a pan on top of that and flip them over, and then they'll bake faster because the air can circulate all underneath them. But I was afraid, I knew these were going to be fragile after I tested a little edge. So I thought, nah, they'll break all to pieces. So this is what I'm doing. You see, I'm just taking them up and breaking them in little sections. Now in the center, they may be a little more, well, softer, undone. So let's see. I'm going to kind of pull them apart. And that's the way they are in the very center. A little bit moister. So that part could have baked a little longer, but it's no big deal. These are just seeds. It's not like they've got raw eggs or something in there, you know. So basically that's what it is in the oven. 40 minutes with that particular recipe. But next time, hopefully I'll have it down pat and have a really good, substantial recipe for you with exactly how long to bake it, you know, within a 5-minute one way or the other, because everybody's oven varies a little bit. So, but they look good, and I've already tasted of them, and they are absolutely delicious. But when I added more almond flour to this second batch, I did add a little more salt. So that's to your taste, of course. So maybe this will give you some ideas, a little inspiration anyway.